To discuss this speech and many other issues, I want to bring in my political panel for today. Liberal Senator Maria Kovacic, who's also the Shadow Assistant Minister for Women, and Labor MP Josh Burns, who's a Special Envoy for Social Housing and Homelessness. Welcome to both of you.
Good afternoon.
PK.
Maria, it's just starting on Sussan's speech. She says she's agnostic about how she gets women into the party, but so far we've had many leaders say they want to do this, but they all clearly haven't done particularly well if you look at your numbers. Don't you need to have those quotas for that to happen?
Where I'll begin to say is that Sussan was incredibly impressive today at the press club, and anybody that knows her is absolutely certain that when she says that she'll do something, she will do it. We need more women in our federal party room. Australians want to see us have more women represent them. That is critically important. I believe that quotas are necessary as a short-term circuit breaker because what we're doing at the moment hasn't worked. It's clear we don't have enough women and we need to create a balance so that, as Sussan properly stated, we have a party that respects, reflects and represents modern Australia.
I'll throw that to you, although, Josh, obviously there are more women on your side, so it might be too much of an easy question, which always alarms me. But we have heard a different approach from Sussan Lee. As you view it, is she making the Liberal Party, I mean, it's early days, but more competitive?
Well, I mean, you should never underestimate or disrespect your opponents, Patricia, so I won't do that. And I actually commend Maria for taking the stance that she just outlined, which is that quotas, work, and that's what happened in the Labor Party, where over decades we have implemented a quota system, and now we have 50% of our caucus as these amazingly smart, strong, and talented women who are not just leading our party but leading our country. And that's the only way that you can change the structural disadvantages that happen in these sorts of organisations. Unfortunately for Sussan Lee, from the clip that I heard, that's not what her policy was. It wasn't what Maria's policy was. It was leaving it up to the states and territories. Well, one of them's in administration, and the rest of the Liberal Party, including the one here in Victoria, is still a bit of a mess.
Well, Maria, I have to give you right of reply on that. It is a pretty messy situation to try and resolve that way, isn't it?
Yeah, the comment I want to make, it's not about me having a policy or Sussan having a policy. It's how we approach the problem that we've got. And what Sussan articulated very, very clearly today is that she wasn't going to direct the process by which we get the outcome, but she expects the outcome. She demands the outcome. And I think that's the most important thing to take away from here.
OK. There are a few other issues, and I'll start with you again, Maria, on them. Net zero, of course, is a big issue. There was an announcement about a review and some people who were put onto that review. We looked at the names a little earlier. It seems to be a coalition review. So that's Sussan McDonald, for instance, is in it. She's a national, sits in the National Party room to review net zero. But the Nationals themselves are having a review. Can you explain to me how that works?
Look, I can't speak to the Nats review, that's a matter for them, but in terms of the broader coalition policy position, and the review relates to the policy within the portfolio frameworks, it's very important that we have these discussions. We, as was articulated again clearly today by Sussan, we were smashed at the last election. What we took to the Australian public was absolutely rejected. Our job now is to listen, and once we've listened to what people are telling us, to then act purposefully in developing good policy. And that is what the job of this committee is. And then the job of each of us in that party room, whether we're Liberals or Nats within the broader coalition party room, is to provide constructive feedback to that. And I think that's something that is really important about how this term of opposition is going to be, in a very different way from the last term of opposition.
Constructive is a word I've heard from you now, Maria. I've heard it from the opposition leader. Josh, we've already seen some examples of that. For instance, Ted O'Brien saying yes to being on that productivity roundtable. So, the opposition saying yes, not no to being part of these processes. Is that a good thing for Australia?
Well, the proof will be in the pudding, Patricia. It's one thing for Ted O'Brien to sit down and have a conversation. It's another thing for the coalition to actually be constructive in the parliament and on the legislation that will help improve the lives of Australians. The examples that first come to mind is when we go back to parliament, we're going to have the legislation that will lower HECS by 20%. The Liberal Party opposed that throughout the entire campaign. I would hope that if you're going to review things, let's start with the review that actually is going to lower student debt and help students go to university and leave without too much debt. That would be a really productive and constructive way for the Liberal Party to begin. And the other one would also be in my own policy area of the Housing Australia Future Fund. I mean, the Liberal Party went to the election promising to scrap the HAF, and that would mean that literally thousands of social housing and affordable housing projects would be completely bankrupt and completely hamstrung. It would mean thousands of people would be out on the streets, organisations would be bankrupt. It would be not just cruel and heartless, it would be very dangerous and frankly idiotic policy for them to scrap it. So if they want to be more constructive, there's two areas where they could start that would actually help students or people who have been to university, and also those who are either waiting on the social housing wait list or who are currently in social housing who would be affected by the Liberal Party's proposed cuts.
Another thing I noticed, Maria, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, and there were questions as well to Sussan Ley, was on Indigenous affairs, and that was a big area of contest in the last parliament, of course, because of the voice referendum as well. But she did actually start her speech by acknowledging traditional owners. And that's something that Peter Dutton made an issue of right at the end of the campaign, when asked, admittedly, but he did then lean into it and make it an issue. I'm imagining that didn't happen as an accident. Is that a sort of shift in emphasis and perspective now under her leadership?
I think we've seen a complete shift in a whole range of areas under Sussan's leadership because she is a different leader. She is someone who is smart, and she's someone who is tenacious, and she's someone that works really hard. And I've said this before and I'll repeat it, she's also somebody I trust. So when Sussan says she's going to do something, she will do it. So I think what's really important for us to take out of today's speech is all of the areas that Sussan has made commitments to, not just in outcomes, but how we're going to get to those outcomes, what kind of a leader she is going to be and what kind of party we are going to be. That is really important.
I'm going to return you to my question, though, politely, the Indigenous affairs question. Is it important that the Liberal Party heals its relationship with some parts of the Indigenous community?
I think it's important that we do, but also more broadly with the entire Australian community in relation to how we didn't clearly articulate what it was that we represented and what our values were and how they could trust us to govern. I'm really pleased to see my Senate colleague Karen Little as the appropriate shadow in that space. She's an incredibly hard-working individual and she's an Indigenous woman herself, and I look forward to seeing the great work that she's going to do in that portfolio.
Now, one of the things that Sussan Ley did say today was that she kind of locked in behind this idea that that defence spending for Australia should get to 3%. Clearly, NATO is meeting at the moment. They're discussing an even bigger ambition that Donald Trump's been pushing for, but clearly many of those countries are also now looking to do. Josh, every time that question about defence spending is put to the government makes the argument, which I imagine you're thinking about doing right now, that you're going up to 2.3% and you're increasing spending, but clearly that's not enough, according to a lot of the experts. Given the international shift, the UK even increasing, like-minded kind of government, progressive government in the UK are increasing defence spending, is it inevitable that we're going to have to look to go even further?
Well, Patricia, I'd say there's a few things that need to guide our thinking in all of this with defence spending. One is that Australia should always act in our own national interest, and that we should ensure that whatever precious dollars we do spend in defence, that they are the right programs and the right assets that are for Australians. And one of the things that happened in the election campaign was the Liberal Party promised a big dollar amount very, very late in the campaign, if you remember, but didn't actually outline where those dollars were going to be allocated. It's no point just throwing around dollar figures and percentages of GDP. What we need to do as a starting point is work out what things do we need for our own country, our own national interests, and how we're going to acquire them. And that's what the Defence Strategic Review was all about. It's what got us into this position of outlining our current defence strategy and our current defence spending. And then, you know, and if circumstances change, which as they inevitably do, as we've seen, you know, things can change very, very quickly. That's the sort of thing that guides defence policy.
OK, so putting that back to you, just final question to you, Maria. I mean, I think those points are important ones. We do have to set our own defence policy. If you are going to increase defence spending, as you've again said today, you're going to have to find a way to pay for it, aren't you?
Yeah, and I want to say one thing first in response to what Josh said. All taxpayer dollars are precious, not just those that go to defence, and we have to ensure that we spend them wisely. But what we can't do in the current environment, and let's be clear, the global environment is problematic. We can't afford to underinvest in defence, in our national security. That is critical. And to the question as to how, well, the Albanese Labor government has a supermajority in the House. That's a question for them. That's their job to work out how we're going to pay for that. OK, it's going to be a question for you closer to a next election, but I accept that you're not going to tell me how you're going to pay for it today. Thank you to both of you for joining me.
Thanks.
Thanks, PK.